My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old, and for the first time in my life, I understand why my own family treated me like a stranger living in their house. What happened at Thanksgiving dinner this year didn't just break my heart, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my identity, my worth, and the people who raised me. But what I discovered afterward changed everything, and now I'm the one they desperately need, while I've learned I never needed their approval to begin with. I need to share this story because I know there are others out there who've felt invisible in their own families, who've wondered why they never seemed to measure up, why their achievements went unnoticed while their siblings or cousins were celebrated for breathing. If that's you, please stay with me through this journey, because what I learned might help you understand your own situation too. Growing up, I always felt like I was living on the periphery of my own family. My parents, Robert and Linda, seemed to view me through a lens of perpetual disappointment, though I could never understand why. My older brother Jake was the golden child, every accomplishment celebrated, every milestone marked with elaborate parties and social media posts that generated hundreds of likes and congratulatory comments from extended family. When Jake graduated high school with a 3.2 GPA, my parents threw him a backyard party with catering and hired a photographer. When I graduated as valedictorian 2 years later, maintaining a 4.0 throughout high school while working part-time to save for college, my mother mentioned it briefly to my aunt over the phone while I was within earshot. No party, no special dinner, just a card with $50 and a note about how education was its own reward. The pattern continued through college. Jake dropped out after 2 semesters, spending his days playing video games and working sporadically at various retail jobs. My parents continued sending him monthly allowances of $800, covering his car insurance and letting him live rent-free in their basement. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through nursing school, graduated summa cum laude, and immediately landed a position at the city's most prestigious hospital. My achievement earned a brief congratulations text from my mother and silence from my father. But it was my cousin Emma who truly made me understand the depth of my family's indifference toward me. Emma, 2 years younger than me, had always been treated like visiting royalty whenever she came around. Emma lived 3 states away with my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, but whenever she visited, the entire family dynamic shifted. Suddenly, my mother would spend days preparing elaborate meals, cleaning the house until it sparkled, and planning activities that revolved entirely around Emma's interests and preferences. Emma was beautiful in that effortless way that some people are, blonde hair that naturally had those beachy waves women pay hundreds of dollars to achieve, bright blue eyes, and a petite frame that looked perfect in everything she wore. She was studying communications at a private college, paid for entirely by her parents, and had never worked a day in her life. Yet every story she told about her relatively mundane college experiences was met with rapt attention and enthusiastic responses from my parents. I remember one particular visit when Emma was 22 and I was 24, just finishing my first year as a registered nurse. Emma spent the entire dinner talking about her sorority's charity car wash, describing it as if she had personally ended world hunger. My parents hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and praising her community involvement. When I mentioned that I had been selected to join the hospital's rapid response team, a significant honor for someone so early in their career, the conversation quickly shifted back to Emma's upcoming spring break trip to Cancun. The financial disparity was perhaps the most painful aspect of the favoritism. For my college graduation, my parents gave me a card with a $100 gift certificate to Target, explaining that they knew I was practical and would appreciate something useful. For Emma's 21st birthday, they flew to her college town and took her on a weekend shopping spree, spending over $2,000 on clothes and jewelry, posting photos throughout the weekend with captions about celebrating their special girl. When I got engaged to David, a fellow nurse I had met during my pediatric rotation, my parents' response was lukewarm at best. They met David twice before offering polite congratulations and asking about our budget for the wedding. When Emma started dating a guy she met at a fraternity party, my parents immediately began planning visits to meet him, talking about how excited they were that Emma had found someone who made her happy. The engagement period revealed even more about my family's priorities. David and I planned a modest wedding with a budget of $15,000, which we had saved ourselves over 2 years. We weren't asking for financial help, just emotional support and enthusiasm from our families. My parents agreed to attend but showed minimal interest in the planning process. They declined to participate in the engagement party David's parents offered to host, claiming they were too busy with work commitments. Meanwhile, Emma announced she was thinking about maybe getting engaged someday to her boyfriend of 6 months, and my parents immediately began discussing potential venue options and sharing wedding planning articles on social media. They started a Pinterest board for Emma's theoretical wedding and sent her links to dress shops, despite no actual proposal having occurred. The pattern extended to every aspect of our lives. When I bought my first house at 26, a modest 3-bedroom ranch that represented years of saving and careful financial planning, my parents visited once, briefly, and spent most of the time pointing out things that needed updating or repair. When Emma moved into a luxury apartment complex that her parents were paying for, my parents drove 3 states to help her decorate and posted a photo album on Facebook titled Emma's New Adventure with heart emojis and celebration comments. I began to document these disparities, not out of spite, but because I needed to understand if I was being oversensitive or if there was truly a systematic difference in how I was treated compared to other family members. I kept a journal of family interactions, noting the different responses to similar situations, the different levels of financial support, the different amounts of time and attention given to various family members' achievements and milestones. The evidence was overwhelming. Emma received birthday gifts averaging $300 per year, while mine averaged $50. Emma's social media posts about mundane activities regularly received enthusiastic comments from my parents, while my posts about professional achievements, community volunteer work, and major life events often went completely unacknowledged. Emma was invited to family gatherings 3 months in advance with multiple follow-up calls to confirm her attendance, while I was often notified about events days beforehand, sometimes after they had already occurred. This systematic differential treatment affected my self-esteem in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I found myself constantly trying to earn their approval through achievements, thinking that surely if I just accomplished enough, contributed enough, succeeded enough, I would finally receive the recognition and affection I craved. I volunteered for extra shifts at the hospital, pursued additional certifications, maintained perfect attendance, and consistently received excellent performance reviews. None of it seemed to matter to my family. The isolation became more pronounced as I got older. Family group texts would include everyone except me, leading to situations where I would arrive at gatherings unaware of changed plans or special circumstances. Photo albums from family events would prominently feature everyone except me, or include photos where I had been cropped out or was positioned at the edge of the frame. Social media posts about family celebrations would tag everyone present except me, making it appear as though I hadn't attended events I had actually organized or hosted. David began to notice the treatment and would gently point out incidents that I had begun to accept as normal. He was the first person to use the word favoritism to describe what he observed, and initially I resisted the label because accepting it meant acknowledging that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had instead chosen to withhold their affection for reasons I couldn't understand. The breaking point came this past Thanksgiving. Emma was visiting for the first time in over a year, and my parents had been preparing for weeks. They purchased new furniture for the guest room, planned an elaborate menu featuring all of Emma's favorite dishes, and invited extended family members specifically to see Emma. I was invited, almost as an afterthought, with my mother mentioning that I should probably come by since it was a holiday. I arrived at the designated time with David, carrying the homemade dessert I had prepared and a bottle of wine. Emma was holding court in the living room, regaling everyone with stories about her new job in marketing, her recent promotion, and her exciting social life in the city. She looked stunning, as always, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. The dinner table was set beautifully, with the good china and crystal glasses that only appeared for special occasions. Emma was seated at my father's right hand, the position of honor, while I was placed at the far end of the table between my elderly uncle and David. The conversation throughout dinner centered entirely on Emma's life, her achievements, her future plans, and her observations about everything from politics to pop culture. What happened next still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. My father stood up to make a toast, something he had never done at any family gathering I could remember. He raised his glass and began talking about how proud he was of the young woman Emma had become, how she represented everything wonderful about our family, how her success and happiness brought joy to all of us. He talked about her intelligence, her beauty, her potential for greatness, and how blessed they felt to have her in their lives. The entire table raised their glasses in agreement, offering additional comments about Emma's wonderful qualities and bright future. Emma basked in the attention, graciously accepting the praise while maintaining an appropriately modest demeanor. It was a beautiful family moment of love and recognition, and I felt like I was watching it through a window from outside in the cold. But then my Aunt Carol, Emma's mother, decided to add her own toast. She stood up with tears in her eyes and began talking about the special bond between families, about how some people were just meant to be together, about how Emma had always been the heart of our family gatherings, and then she said something that made my blood freeze. She said that Emma was proof that bloodlines and genetics didn't matter as much as love and choice, that families were built on more than just biology, and that Emma would always be their chosen daughter, their special girl, their perfect addition to the family tree. The comment seemed innocent enough on the surface, but something about the way she said it, the meaningful look she exchanged with my mother, and the sudden shift in the room's energy made me pay closer attention. David squeezed my hand under the table, sensing that something significant had just occurred, though neither of us understood what. After the toast, Emma received a presentation of gifts that my parents had apparently been collecting for months. Jewelry, gift certificates, items from her Amazon wish list, and a check for $2,000 to help with what they called her career transition expenses. The gift-giving ceremony lasted nearly 30 minutes, with each present accompanied by explanations of how they had thought specifically of Emma while shopping, how they wanted to support her dreams, and how much she meant to all of them. I sat watching this celebration of someone who visited twice a year at most, while I had spent every holiday, birthday, and family crisis providing support, assistance, and presence. I had been the one to drive my parents to medical appointments, help them navigate insurance issues, and provide professional advice when my grandfather was hospitalized. I had been the one to organize family gatherings, coordinate gift purchases for other relatives, and maintain relationships with extended family members. When the gift ceremony concluded, Emma looked around the table with tears of gratitude and began thanking everyone individually for their love and support. She thanked my parents for treating her like their own daughter, thanked my brother for being such a wonderful cousin, thanked my aunt and uncle for making the trip, and thanked various other family members for specific acts of kindness and generosity. She never said my name, not once. It was as if I wasn't sitting at the table, as if I hadn't prepared food for the gathering, as if I hadn't contributed to her gift fund that my mother had organized, as if I simply didn't exist in her consciousness or gratitude. But what was even more devastating was that nobody else seemed to notice. The omission of my name, my presence, my contributions to the family and the gathering went completely unremarked upon by everyone present. I realized in that moment that I was as invisible to them as I was to Emma, that my absence from her gratitude speech wasn't an oversight, but an accurate reflection of how the entire family viewed my significance. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but really I needed a moment to process what had just occurred. Standing in my childhood bathroom, looking at my reflection in the same mirror where I had practiced valedictorian speeches and prepared for job interviews, I finally understood that I was fundamentally different from the rest of my family in ways that went beyond personality or interests. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on to planning Emma's next visit and discussing potential family vacation options that would accommodate her schedule. I sat quietly for the remainder of the evening, observing interactions and comments with new awareness of my peripheral status in the family dynamic. David and I left shortly after dessert, with polite thank yous and promises to see everyone soon. In the car ride home, David was unusually quiet until finally asking if I was okay. I found myself unable to articulate what had happened because I wasn't entirely sure myself. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of my place in my family, and it wasn't a pleasant realization. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the evening's events, particularly my Aunt Carol's toast, and the meaningful looks exchanged between family members. There had been something intentionally cryptic about her comments regarding bloodlines and chosen family, something that seemed to reference shared knowledge that had been deliberately excluded from me. I began thinking about the physical differences between Emma and me that I had always attributed to genetics variation within families. Emma's blonde hair and blue eyes contrasted sharply with the dark hair and brown eyes that characterized most of our family. Emma's petite build was different from the taller, more athletic builds that ran in our family line. Emma's facial features, while beautiful, didn't particularly resemble anyone in our extended family, while I had always been told I looked exactly like my grandmother. But more than physical differences, I began to recognize personality and behavioral patterns that seemed inconsistent with our family dynamics. Emma had always been confident and outgoing in ways that seemed natural and effortless, while I had always felt like I was performing a role that didn't quite fit. Emma seemed to understand unspoken family rules and expectations that I had never managed to grasp. Emma navigated family relationships with an ease that I had never experienced, as if she possessed some inherent knowledge that had been withheld from me. The next morning, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I called my Aunt Carol, Emma's mother, and asked if I could meet with her privately to discuss something important. She agreed, though her voice carried a tension that I had never heard before. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, and I could see immediately that she was nervous. She kept adjusting her purse, checking her phone, and avoiding direct eye contact in ways that were completely unlike her normal, confident demeanor. I decided to be direct. I told her that the previous evening had left me with questions about my place in the family, that I felt like there were things being discussed around me but not with me, and that I needed to understand what was happening. I told her about the years of feeling different, feeling excluded, feeling like I was missing some crucial piece of information about family dynamics. Her reaction was immediate and telling. She began crying before I had finished speaking, and her first words were an apology. She said she had been waiting for this conversation for years, that she had told my parents they needed to handle the situation honestly, and that she couldn't continue pretending that I didn't deserve to know the truth. The truth was that I was adopted. Not only was I adopted, but I had been adopted under circumstances that my parents had spent 29 years trying to hide from me and most of the extended family. My biological mother had been my father's younger sister, Rebecca, who had gotten pregnant at 17 with a man she refused to identify. Rebecca had died in a car accident when I was 6 months old, and my parents had agreed to raise me rather than allowing me to enter the foster care system. But the adoption had been informal and secretive. Instead of celebrating their decision to provide a loving home for their niece, my parents had created an elaborate fiction about my origins. They had told most people that I was their biological child, born during a period when they had briefly moved to another state for work. Only a few family members knew the truth, and they had all agreed to maintain the deception indefinitely. Emma, on the other hand, was not actually related to our family at all. She was the biological daughter of my Aunt Carol and her husband, but due to some complex family dynamics involving Carol's first marriage and subsequent adoption procedures, Emma had been legally adopted by my parents when she was a toddler. However, she had continued living with Carol and her husband, visiting my parents regularly as an honored and beloved daughter. The reason for the differential treatment was now crystal clear. Emma was their chosen daughter, legally adopted through proper channels with celebration and acceptance. I was the obligation they had reluctantly accepted, the reminder of family scandal and tragedy that they had never fully embraced. My Aunt Carol explained that she had argued with my parents for years about telling me the truth. She felt that I deserved to know my origins, to understand why I looked different from my cousins, to have access to my biological mother's medical history, and to understand my place in the family structure. But my parents had insisted that revealing the truth would serve no purpose except to hurt me and complicate family relationships. What Carol revealed next was even more devastating. My parents had been receiving Social Security survivor benefits on my behalf since my biological mother's death, benefits that were supposed to be used for my care and support. Instead of using this money for my expenses, they had deposited it into a savings account that they planned to give to me when I turned 30, believing this demonstrated their responsible stewardship of my financial interests. However, they had been using Emma's legal status as their adopted daughter to claim tax benefits and educational support that had helped fund her college education and living expenses. Emma was receiving financial support that was legally meant for adopted children, while I was receiving none of the emotional or practical support typically provided to biological children. The conversation with my aunt lasted 4 hours. She showed me photographs of my biological mother that revealed a striking physical resemblance between us. She told me stories about Rebecca's personality, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her love of reading and music, her rebellious spirit that had led to conflicts with her parents. She explained that Rebecca had been intelligent and creative, traits that she saw reflected in my academic achievements and problem-solving abilities. Most importantly, she told me that Rebecca had loved me desperately during the 6 months she had with me, that she had fought to keep me despite family pressure to consider other options, and that her decision to raise me herself had been motivated by fierce maternal love, not irresponsibility or selfishness. I left that conversation with my entire identity completely reconstructed. Everything I had believed about myself, my family, and my place in the world had been built on a foundation of lies and deliberate deception. The people I had spent my life trying to please and impress had been lying to me every single day for 29 years while treating their actual chosen child like visiting royalty. But I also left that conversation with something I had never had before, an understanding of why I had always felt different, why my achievements had never seemed to matter to my parents, why I had struggled to fit into family dynamics that weren't actually designed to include me. The next few days were a blur of emotions that I struggled to process. Anger at the deception, grief for the mother I had never known I lost, relief at finally understanding the family dynamics that had confused me for decades, and a strange sense of liberation at realizing that my parents' indifference wasn't a reflection of my worth, but rather of their inability to fully accept their obligation to raise me. I decided to confront my parents directly with what I had learned. I called and asked them to meet with me to discuss something important, and I could hear the anxiety in my mother's voice when she agreed. They probably suspected that their secret was about to be revealed, and they were right. I met them at their house, the same house where I had grown up feeling like a perpetual guest. I sat in the living room where Emma had been celebrated just days before and told them that I knew the truth about my adoption, about Rebecca, about Emma's legal status, and about the financial benefits they had been receiving on my behalf. Their reaction was everything I expected and worse. Instead of apologizing for the deception or acknowledging the pain they had caused, they immediately became defensive. My father insisted that they had made the best decisions for everyone involved, that telling me the truth earlier would have served no purpose, and that I was being ungrateful for questioning the people who had provided me with a home and education. My mother took a different approach, crying and insisting that they loved me just as much as they would any biological child, that the adoption circumstances didn't change their feelings for me, and that I was being unfair to judge decisions they had made with the best of intentions. But when I asked them why Emma had been celebrated as their chosen daughter while I had been treated as an obligation, they couldn't provide a satisfactory answer. When I asked them why they had never told me about my biological mother, they claimed they were protecting me from painful information. When I asked them about the financial disparities between Emma's support and my own, they insisted that every family handled finances differently and that I had never been denied anything I truly needed. The conversation lasted hours and resolved nothing. They refused to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been fundamentally different from their treatment of Emma, insisted that I was misinterpreting normal family dynamics, and maintained that their decision to conceal my adoption had been motivated by love rather than shame or convenience. I realized during that conversation that they would never take responsibility for the emotional damage they had caused, never acknowledge the systematic favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood and young adulthood, and never understand why their actions had been harmful rather than protective. But I also realized something else. I no longer needed their acknowledgement or approval to understand my own worth. The validation I had spent my entire life seeking from them was never going to come, not because I was unworthy of it, but because they were incapable of providing it. I left that meeting with a clear understanding of what needed to happen next. I needed to establish boundaries that would protect my emotional well-being while allowing me to maintain whatever relationship with them was healthy and sustainable. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in adoption trauma and family dynamics. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my experience was unfortunately common among children who had been informally adopted by relatives, particularly in situations involving family secrets and shame. She explained that my parents' inability to fully embrace me as their own child was likely rooted in their unresolved feelings about Rebecca's death and their resentment about having their family planning decisions made for them by circumstances beyond their control. More importantly, she helped me understand that the love and acceptance I had been seeking from my parents was something I could provide for myself, and that my worth as a person wasn't dependent on their recognition or approval. Through therapy, I began to understand that Emma wasn't the villain in this story. She had been a child caught in the same web of family deception that I had, though she had benefited from it rather than suffered because of it. Her treatment as the favored child wasn't her fault, though her complete obliviousness to the differential treatment suggested that she had never questioned her privileged position within the family structure. I decided to have a conversation with Emma about what I had learned. I called her and explained that I had discovered the truth about our adoptions and wanted to discuss how this information might affect our relationship going forward. Emma's response was revealing. She admitted that she had always known about both of our adoption circumstances, but she had been told by my parents never to discuss it with me. She had been instructed to treat the information as a family secret that needed to be protected for my own good. What was most interesting was Emma's acknowledgement that she had always felt uncomfortable with the differential treatment she observed, but had never questioned it because it benefited her. She admitted that she had noticed the disparity in gift-giving, attention, and support, but she had assumed it was normal family dynamics rather than systematic favoritism based on adoption circumstances. Emma expressed genuine remorse for her role in perpetuating the deception, particularly for not acknowledging my presence during her Thanksgiving gratitude speech. She admitted that she had become so accustomed to being the center of family attention that she hadn't considered how her oversight might affect me. This conversation led to the first honest relationship Emma and I had ever had. Without the weight of family secrets and unexplained differential treatment, we were able to connect as two young women who had both been affected by adult decisions made before we were old enough to understand or consent to them. Emma shared that she had always felt pressure to justify the special treatment she received, to be worthy of the investment my parents had made in her, and to maintain her position as the favored child. She admitted that this pressure had affected her self-esteem and her ability to form authentic relationships, as she was never sure whether people liked her for herself or for the privilege and benefits she represented. Meanwhile, I had been attending therapy regularly and working through the complex emotions surrounding my adoption revelation. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my achievements were even more impressive given the lack of family support I had received, that my resilience and independence were strengths rather than character flaws, and that my desire for family acceptance was natural but not necessary for my continued success and happiness. Through therapy, I also began to understand Rebecca, my biological mother, as a real person rather than just a tragic figure. My Aunt Carol connected me with some of Rebecca's friends from high school who shared stories about her personality, her dreams, her struggles, and her love for me during the months she had with me. I learned that Rebecca had been planning to finish high school despite her pregnancy, that she had researched child development and parenting strategies, and that she had chosen my name specifically because it meant princess in Hebrew, reflecting her hopes for my future. These conversations helped me understand that I came from love, even if the people who raised me had been unable to fully express love toward me. Rebecca had wanted me, had fought for me, and had seen me as a blessing rather than a burden. Armed with this new understanding of my origins and worth, I began setting boundaries with my parents that reflected my adult needs and expectations. I informed them that I would no longer attend family gatherings where Emma was treated significantly differently than I was, that I expected acknowledgement of my achievements and contributions to the family, and that I would not tolerate dismissive or minimizing comments about my career, relationship, or life choices. I also informed them that I expected transparency about family financial matters that affected me, including the Social Security benefits that had been collected on my behalf and any other legal or financial arrangements related to my adoption. Their response to these boundary-setting conversations was predictable. They accused me of being demanding and ungrateful, insisted that I was misunderstanding their intentions and motivations, and claimed that I was trying to create problems where none existed. But I had learned through therapy that their resistance to acknowledging harmful behavior was not my responsibility to manage. I could control my own actions and responses, but I could not force them to take accountability for the pain they had caused or the deception they had maintained. I decided to demonstrate my boundaries rather than continuing to argue about them. When they invited me to Easter dinner but mentioned that Emma would be receiving a special celebration for her recent job promotion, I politely declined and made other plans. When they called to complain about my absence, I calmly explained that I had informed them I would not attend gatherings where differential treatment was the central focus. This pattern continued for several months. I would be invited to family events. I would ask about the plans and expectations, and if the event was designed to celebrate Emma while ignoring my presence or contributions, I would make alternative arrangements. Initially, my absence didn't seem to impact the family dynamic at all. They continued having gatherings without me, continued celebrating Emma's various achievements and milestones, and continued treating my absence as evidence of my difficult personality rather than as a consequence of their behavioral choices. But then something unexpected happened that changed the entire family dynamic and forced them to confront the consequences of their treatment toward me. My grandfather, my father's father, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in August. The diagnosis came as a shock to the entire family, as he had been relatively healthy for his 78 years and had been complaining only of minor digestive issues that everyone assumed were related to his diet. The oncologist explained that pancreatic cancer was notoriously difficult to treat and that my grandfather likely had only a few months to live. The family was devastated, and suddenly everyone was scrambling to spend time with him and ensure that his final months were as comfortable and meaningful as possible. As a registered nurse with oncology experience, I was uniquely qualified to help navigate the medical system, understand treatment options, coordinate care between specialists, and provide practical support for managing symptoms and side effects. My knowledge of hospital procedures, insurance requirements, and medical terminology made me an invaluable resource during a frightening and overwhelming time. But because of the boundaries I had established with my family, they were hesitant to ask for my help directly. They had spent months dismissing my concerns and minimizing my contributions to the family, and now they found themselves in desperate need of exactly the expertise and support I could provide. My Aunt Carol called me first, explaining the diagnosis and asking if I would be willing to help coordinate my grandfather's care, despite the ongoing family tensions. She acknowledged that my medical expertise was crucial for ensuring that my grandfather received the best possible treatment and that my presence would be comforting for him during a terrifying time. I agreed immediately to help with my grandfather's care, but I made it clear that my involvement would be focused on his medical needs rather than on repairing family relationships. I would provide professional guidance and emotional support for him, but I would not pretend that the underlying family issues had been resolved simply because of his illness. Over the following weeks, I spent countless hours researching treatment options, accompanying my grandfather to medical appointments, translating medical jargon for other family members, and coordinating care between his various specialists. I took time off work to drive him to chemotherapy sessions, organized his medications, and provided overnight care when he was too weak to manage alone. My grandfather and I developed a close relationship during this time that we had never had when I was younger. He shared stories about his own childhood, his experiences in the military, his courtship of my grandmother, and his observations about family dynamics over the decades. Most importantly, he expressed genuine appreciation for my dedication to his care and my professional expertise in navigating the medical system. During one of our conversations, my grandfather asked me directly about the family tensions he had observed. He had noticed my absence from recent gatherings and had heard whispered conversations about adoption revelations and hurt feelings. He wanted to understand what had happened and whether there was anything he could do to help repair the relationships. I explained the entire situation to him, from the years of differential treatment to the recent revelation about my adoption circumstances to my decision to establish boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. I told him about Emma's favored status, about the financial disparities, about the systematic exclusion from family decisions and celebrations. His response surprised me. He told me that he had always suspected there were secrets surrounding my adoption, that he had noticed the different ways my parents treated Emma and me, and that he had been uncomfortable with the obvious favoritism but hadn't known how to address it without creating family conflict. More importantly, he told me that he had always been proud of my achievements, my independence, and my strength in navigating challenges that other family members had never faced. He said that my success as a nurse, my financial responsibility, and my resilience in dealing with family dysfunction demonstrated character traits that he valued and respected. He also shared something that would become crucial information later. He told me that he had been planning to leave me a significant inheritance in his will, specifically because he recognized that I had never received the same level of financial support from my parents that Emma had received, and he wanted to ensure that I was provided for after his death. This inheritance revelation became important when my parents discovered that my grandfather had been discussing his will with me during our private conversations. They were apparently concerned that I was influencing his decisions for my own financial benefit, and they confronted me about my motivations for providing his care. The accusation was devastating and insulting. They suggested that my sudden involvement in my grandfather's care was calculated to secure a larger inheritance, that my professional medical assistance was manipulation rather than genuine concern, and that I was taking advantage of an elderly man's gratitude to advance my own financial interests. This accusation revealed the depth of their inability to understand my character or motivations. I had provided my grandfather's care because I loved him, and because my professional skills could ease his suffering during a difficult time. The idea that I would manipulate a dying man for financial gain was so contrary to my values and ethics that I couldn't believe they were capable of suggesting it. But their accusation also revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of inheritance dynamics. They seemed to believe that my grandfather's money belonged to them by default, and that any bequest to me would be taking something away from their rightful inheritance. They couldn't conceive of the possibility that I might deserve recognition or financial support based on my own contributions and relationship with my grandfather. The confrontation about inheritance motivations was the final straw in my relationship with my parents. I realized that they would never be capable of seeing me as anything other than an obligation, a problem to be managed, or a threat to be contained. They would always view my achievements with suspicion, my success with resentment, and my happiness with skepticism. I made the decision to continue providing care for my grandfather while completely detaching emotionally from my parents' approval or recognition. I would do what was right for him because I loved him and because it aligned with my professional and personal values. But I would no longer invest any energy in trying to earn respect from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. My grandfather passed away in November, surrounded by family members who loved him. I was holding his hand when he died, and his last words were expressing gratitude for the care I had provided and pride in the woman I had become. It was the first time in my adult life that I felt truly seen and valued by a family member, and it was a gift that came just before I lost him forever. The will reading took place 2 weeks after the funeral. As my grandfather had mentioned, he had left me a significant inheritance, $50,000, and his house, which was worth approximately $200,000. The bequest came with a letter explaining that he recognized I had never received the same level of family support that other grandchildren had received, and he wanted to ensure that I had financial security and stability as I built my independent life. My parents were furious. They accused me of manipulating him, demanded that I contest the will to distribute his assets more equitably among all family members, and threatened to take legal action if I accepted the inheritance. They claimed that I had taken advantage of his illness to secure financial benefits that rightfully belonged to the entire family. Their reaction confirmed everything I had learned about their character over the previous months. They were unable to accept that my grandfather might have genuinely appreciated my care and wanted to recognize my contributions to his final months. They were unable to acknowledge that I might deserve financial support or recognition based on my own relationship with him, rather than my position within their family structure. But most importantly, their reaction revealed that they viewed me as fundamentally selfish and manipulative, incapable of providing care or support without ulterior motives. They could not conceive of the possibility that I had genuinely loved my grandfather and wanted to ease his suffering, regardless of any potential inheritance. I decided to accept the inheritance exactly as my grandfather had intended. I used part of the money to pay off my student loans, invested another portion for my future financial security, and kept his house as a rental property that would provide additional income. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial stability that was completely independent of my parents' approval or support. The inheritance also provided me with something even more valuable than money: validation that my worth and contributions had been recognized by someone whose opinion mattered to me. My grandfather had seen my character, valued my dedication, and wanted to ensure my future success. His recognition meant more to me than any amount of approval I might have eventually earned from my parents. With this financial security and emotional validation, I was able to make decisions about my family relationships based on my own values and needs, rather than on fear of abandonment or financial dependence. I could choose to maintain relationships that were healthy and fulfilling while walking away from relationships that were toxic or damaging. I informed my parents that I would no longer be participating in family gatherings or activities where differential treatment was the norm, where my contributions were minimized or ignored, or where I was expected to tolerate disrespectful behavior in the name of family harmony. I would maintain individual relationships with family members who treated me with respect and kindness, but I would not subject myself to group dynamics that were harmful to my emotional well-being. Emma reached out to me after the inheritance controversy, expressing concern about the family conflicts and asking if there was anything she could do to help repair the relationships. I appreciated her gesture, but I explained that the problems were rooted in patterns that had existed long before the inheritance issue and that couldn't be resolved simply through her intervention. However, Emma and I were able to maintain our newfound honest relationship independent of the broader family dynamics. We began meeting regularly for coffee or lunch, sharing our experiences and perspectives without the pressure of family politics or competing for attention and approval. Emma revealed that she had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the preferential treatment she continued to receive from my parents, particularly in light of learning about the years of differential treatment I had experienced. She had begun declining some of the financial support they offered and encouraging them to include me more meaningfully in family decisions and celebrations. Her efforts were well-intentioned, but ultimately ineffective. My parents were unwilling to acknowledge patterns of favoritism or to change behaviors that had been established over decades. They viewed Emma's concerns as evidence that I had been manipulating her perspective, rather than as legitimate feedback about their treatment of family members. Through therapy, I learned that this resistance to accountability was typical of people who had built their identities around their roles as loving parents and generous relatives. Acknowledging systematic favoritism or emotional neglect would require them to confront uncomfortable truths about their character and motivations, which many people are psychologically unable or unwilling to do. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my healing and future happiness were not dependent on my parents' acknowledgement of past harm or their commitment to changing future behavior. I could build a fulfilling life based on my own values and relationships, regardless of whether they ever developed the capacity for honest self-reflection or genuine accountability. This understanding was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. For 29 years, I had been trying to earn love and approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it, not because I was unworthy of love, but because they were limited in their ability to recognize worth that didn't align with their preconceived expectations. I began investing my emotional energy in relationships that were reciprocal and supportive. David and I got married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and chosen family members who celebrated our happiness genuinely and enthusiastically. My parents attended but spent most of the reception comparing our modest celebration unfavorably to hypothetical future weddings they were planning for Emma. I built stronger connections with colleagues at work who valued my expertise and appreciated my contributions to patient care. I joined professional organizations where my achievements were recognized and celebrated by people who understood the dedication required to excel in healthcare. I developed friendships with people who had similar values and interests, people who offered mutual support and encouragement rather than conditional approval based on performance or compliance. These relationships taught me what healthy family dynamics were supposed to feel like, and they provided models for the kinds of connections I wanted to cultivate in my life. Most importantly, I began to understand that the family I was born into was just one possible source of love and belonging, and that I had the power to create additional sources of connection and support that were more aligned with my needs and values. David and I started talking about having children of our own, and I realized that becoming a parent would give me the opportunity to break the cycle of favoritism and conditional love that had characterized my childhood. I could choose to raise children who felt valued for who they were, rather than for how well they met external expectations. I also realized that my experience with family dysfunction had prepared me to help other people who were struggling with similar issues. I began volunteering with support groups for adopted adults who were dealing with identity questions and family conflicts. My story resonated with people who had felt invisible in their own families, who had struggled to understand differential treatment, or who had discovered family secrets that explained years of confusion and pain. This volunteer work became incredibly fulfilling because it allowed me to transform my painful experiences into something that could help other people heal and grow. I could offer validation to people whose experiences had been minimized or dismissed, and I could provide practical guidance for establishing boundaries and building healthier relationship patterns. Through this work, I met other people who had discovered adoption secrets as adults, who had experienced systematic favoritism within their families, or who had struggled to earn recognition from parents who were incapable of providing unconditional love. Their stories helped me understand that my experience was not unique or unusual, and that the patterns I had experienced were common enough that there were entire therapeutic frameworks designed to address them. Learning about other people's journeys through similar challenges helped me recognize how much progress I had made in healing from my childhood experiences. I had gone from desperately seeking approval from people who were incapable of providing it to building a life based on my own values and surrounded by people who genuinely valued my presence and contributions. I had gone from feeling ashamed of my adoption circumstances to feeling proud of my resilience in overcoming challenges that many people never face. I had gone from defining my worth through other people's recognition to understanding that my value was inherent and independent of external validation. Most importantly, I had learned to differentiate between people who were capable of healthy relationships and people who were limited by their own emotional dysfunction. This skill allowed me to invest my energy in connections that were likely to be reciprocal and fulfilling while protecting myself from relationships that were consistently draining or harmful. 2 years after my grandfather's death, my parents reached out to invite me to Christmas dinner. They mentioned that Emma would be bringing her new boyfriend and that they were planning a special celebration to welcome him to the family. They asked if I would be willing to attend and help with the preparations, as if the previous years of conflict had never occurred. I realized that this invitation was a perfect test of the boundaries I had established and the growth I had achieved through therapy and self-reflection. My old pattern would have been to accept the invitation despite knowing that I would be relegated to a supporting role while Emma's relationship was celebrated as the main event. I would have convinced myself that family harmony was worth the emotional cost of being treated as an afterthought. But my new understanding of healthy relationships allowed me to decline the invitation without guilt or resentment. I politely explained that I had other plans for the holiday and wished them well with their celebration. I didn't argue about the differential treatment or try to convince them to change their approach. I simply made a choice that aligned with my values and protected my emotional well-being. Their response to my declining their invitation was predictable. They accused me of being stubborn and unforgiving, claimed they were trying to include me in family activities, and suggested that I was punishing them for past mistakes that they had already apologized for, though no such apologies had ever actually occurred. But their reaction didn't affect me the way it would have in the past. I recognized their comments as manipulative attempts to make me responsible for managing their emotions and maintaining family relationships, regardless of how those relationships affected my own well-being. I understood that their anger was really frustration at losing their ability to control my behavior through guilt and obligation. Instead of engaging with their emotional manipulation, I maintained my boundaries calmly and consistently. I continued to decline invitations to events where I would be treated as secondary to Emma's presence, and I continued to invest my energy in relationships that were reciprocal and respectful. This approach eventually led to a surprising development. About 6 months after the Christmas invitation incident, Emma called me to express frustration with the ongoing family dynamics. She had become increasingly uncomfortable with the pressure to be the perfect daughter and the center of family attention, and she was beginning to understand how the preferential treatment had affected both of us negatively. Emma told me that she had tried to encourage my parents to include me more meaningfully in family activities, but that they consistently dismissed her suggestions as unnecessary or potentially problematic. She was beginning to recognize that their resistance to treating us equitably was not based on protecting family harmony, but rather on maintaining their control over family dynamics. More importantly, Emma shared that she had begun to feel isolated and artificial in her role as the favored child. She felt pressure to justify the special treatment she received, to maintain an image of perfection that was exhausting, and to suppress any doubts or criticisms about family dynamics in order to preserve her privileged position. This conversation helped me understand that the favoritism that had harmed me had also harmed Emma, though in different ways. While I had struggled with feeling invisible and unworthy, she had struggled with feeling like her worth was conditional on maintaining her favored status. While I had been denied unconditional love, she had been denied the opportunity to develop authentic relationships free from performance pressure. Emma and I decided to work together to establish healthier relationships with our parents, not by trying to change their behavior, but by refusing to participate in dynamics that were harmful to both of us. We agreed to support each other in maintaining boundaries and to build our own relationship independent of their approval or involvement. This alliance with Emma strengthened both of our positions in dealing with family dysfunction. We were no longer competing for limited approval or trying to navigate conflicting loyalties. Instead, we were working together to create healthier patterns that served both of our needs. Our united approach eventually forced my parents to confront the consequences of their systematic favoritism. When both Emma and I began declining invitations to events that perpetuated differential treatment, they were left planning family gatherings where the dynamics they had created were no longer sustainable. They tried various strategies to regain control over our participation in family activities. They offered financial incentives, made promises about changing their behavior, and attempted to guilt us into compliance by emphasizing family obligations and traditions. But both Emma and I had learned to recognize these tactics as manipulation rather than genuine attempts at relationship improvement. The real breakthrough came when my parents realized that their grandchildren, the children Emma and I would eventually have, would be affected by the family dynamics they had created. They began to understand that their unwillingness to address systematic favoritism and emotional dysfunction would limit their relationships with future generations of family members. This realization motivated them to begin family therapy, though their initial participation was motivated more by wanting to regain control over family dynamics than by genuine desire for personal growth or accountability. However, the therapeutic process eventually helped them recognize some of the patterns they had established and the harm those patterns had caused. Progress was slow and inconsistent. There were sessions where they demonstrated genuine insight and remorse, followed by periods where they reverted to defensive justifications and blame shifting. But gradually, they began to acknowledge that their treatment of Emma and me had been systematically different and that this differential treatment had been harmful to both of us. More importantly, they began to understand that repairing the relationships would require consistent behavioral changes rather than just verbal apologies or promises of future improvement. They would need to demonstrate their commitment to equitable treatment through their actions over time, and they would need to accept that Emma and I would be evaluating their sincerity based on their behavior rather than their intentions. This process took over a year, and there were many setbacks and frustrations along the way. But eventually, my parents began to demonstrate genuine changes in how they approached family relationships. They started acknowledging my achievements and contributions without comparing them to Emma's experiences. They began including both of us equitably in family planning and decision-making. They stopped offering different levels of financial support based on their perceptions of our individual needs or worthiness. Most importantly, they began to understand that rebuilding trust would require consistent effort over time, rather than dramatic gestures or promises of instant transformation. They accepted that Emma and I would need to see sustained changes in their behavior before we would be comfortable fully re-engaging in family relationships. The healing process was gradual and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was based on honesty and accountability rather than the denial and manipulation that had characterized our family dynamics for decades. For the first time in my adult life, I began to feel like I was actually part of a family rather than just an obligation that was being managed. David and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Rebecca after my biological mother, 2 years after beginning the family therapy process. My parents' response to her birth was the first real test of their commitment to changed behavior. Instead of immediately comparing her to hypothetical future children that Emma might have, they focused entirely on celebrating Rebecca's arrival and supporting David and me as new parents. They offered practical help with childcare and household responsibilities, provided emotional support during the adjustment to parenthood, and demonstrated genuine excitement about their role as grandparents. Most importantly, they began sharing stories about my biological mother with Rebecca, helping her understand her family history and heritage in ways that honored Rebecca's memory rather than treating it as a shameful secret. They displayed photographs of my biological mother in their home and talked about her positive qualities and the love she had felt for me during the brief time we had together. This openness about family history represented a fundamental shift in how they approached difficult topics and family secrets. Instead of protecting themselves through denial and concealment, they were choosing transparency and honesty, even when those choices were emotionally challenging. Emma also welcomed her first child, a son, around the same time. My parents' response to his birth was equitable to their response to Rebecca's arrival, demonstrating that they were genuinely committed to treating their grandchildren with equal love and support, rather than perpetuating the favoritism patterns that had characterized their relationships with Emma and me. Watching my parents interact with their grandchildren showed me glimpses of the people they might have been if they had been capable of providing unconditional love during my childhood. They were patient, affectionate, and supportive with Rebecca and Emma's son in ways they had never been with me at the same age. While this recognition was sometimes painful, it was also liberating. I realized that their inability to love me unconditionally during my childhood had been about their limitations rather than my worthiness. Seeing them demonstrate capacity for healthy grandparent relationships proved that I had not been fundamentally unlovable. I had simply been raised by people who were not equipped to provide the kind of parenting I needed. This understanding allowed me to forgive them without excusing their behavior or minimizing the harm they had caused. I could acknowledge that they had done their best within their emotional limitations, while still maintaining boundaries that protected my current well-being and that of my own family. The forgiveness process was not about pretending that the pain hadn't occurred or about returning to previous relationship patterns that had been harmful. Instead, it was about releasing my attachment to receiving the validation I had never gotten and focusing my energy on building the kind of family culture I wanted for my own children. David and I made conscious decisions about how to raise Rebecca that were informed by my experiences with family dysfunction, but not limited by them. We committed to providing unconditional love, equitable treatment if we had additional children, honest communication about family history, and respect for her individual personality and interests. We also made decisions about extended family relationships that prioritized her emotional well-being over family obligations or traditions. We would maintain connections with relatives who demonstrated healthy relationship patterns, but we would protect her from dynamics that might be harmful to her developing sense of self-worth. These decisions represented a complete break from the family culture I had grown up in, where children were expected to adapt to adult dysfunction rather than being protected from it. Rebecca would grow up knowing that she was valued for who she was rather than for how well she met external expectations, and she would learn to recognize and maintain healthy relationship boundaries from an early age. As Rebecca grew older, she began to demonstrate personality traits that reminded me of my biological mother, based on the stories my Aunt Carol had shared about Rebecca's creativity, independence, and strong sense of justice. Watching these traits develop in my daughter helped me feel connected to my biological mother in ways I had never experienced before. I realized that Rebecca had given me not just a piece of herself, but also a piece of the mother I had never known. Through raising my daughter, I was able to understand something about the love my biological mother had felt for me and the dreams she had held for my future. This connection across generations gave me a sense of continuity and belonging that I had never found in my adoptive family relationships. I was part of a lineage of strong women who had faced challenges with resilience and who had prioritized love over convention or comfort. Rebecca would grow up knowing about all the women who had contributed to her heritage: the biological grandmother who had loved her mother fiercely despite difficult circumstances, the adoptive grandparents who had eventually learned to provide better love, and the mother who had worked to heal generational patterns and create healthier family dynamics. Now, 3 years after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner where my family forgot my name while celebrating Emma, I understand that their oversight was actually a gift. It forced me to confront the reality of my place in their hierarchy and motivated me to build a life based on my own values rather than their approval. I am successful in my career, financially secure through my grandfather's recognition of my worth, married to someone who celebrates my achievements, and raising a daughter who will never doubt her value or place in our family. I have built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who provide the mutual support and recognition that I had always sought from my birth family. Most importantly, I have learned that my worth is not dependent on other people's recognition or approval. I am valuable because of my character, my contributions, my resilience, and my capacity for love, not because of how well I meet other people's expectations or requirements. The family relationships that I maintain now are based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. I have connections with relatives who have demonstrated their ability to participate in healthy relationships, and I have boundaries that protect me from relatives who have not developed that capacity. Emma and I have built a strong friendship based on honesty and mutual support. We share the unique experience of having been raised in the same dysfunctional family system, and we support each other in maintaining the healthy boundaries we have established. Our children will grow up as cousins who are treated equitably and who understand that family love should be unconditional and freely given. My parents continue to work on improving their relationship patterns, though progress is sometimes inconsistent. I appreciate their efforts while maintaining realistic expectations about their capacity for change. Our relationship now is limited but genuine, based on their demonstrated behavior rather than their promises or my childhood hopes. If you are watching this because you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know that you are not responsible for earning love from people who are incapable of providing it unconditionally. Your worth is not determined by your family's recognition or approval, and you have the power to build relationships that celebrate and support who you are rather than who others think you should be. Family dysfunction is not your fault, even if you were trained from childhood to believe that you were the problem. Systematic favoritism, emotional neglect, and manipulative behaviors are choices that adults make, and those choices reflect their limitations rather than your deficiencies. You deserve relationships where your presence is celebrated, your achievements are recognized, your contributions are valued, and your growth is supported. If your birth family cannot provide those things, you have the right to build chosen family relationships that can. Healing from family dysfunction is possible, but it requires you to prioritize your own emotional well-being over other people's comfort or expectations. It requires you to set boundaries that may be uncomfortable for family members who have benefited from previous dysfunctional patterns. It requires you to build your sense of worth internally rather than seeking external validation from people who may never be capable of providing it. But the work is worth it, because the life you can build on the other side of that healing is based on authenticity, mutual respect, and genuine love rather than performance, competition, and conditional approval. You are worthy of unconditional love, equitable treatment, and genuine celebration. If you are not receiving those things from your family of origin, please know that it is possible to create or find them elsewhere. Your story does not end with their limitations. It begins with your decision to build something better. Thank you for listening to my story, and please share your own experiences in the comments if you feel comfortable doing so. We heal in community, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to begin their own journey toward healthier relationships and greater self-worth. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about family dynamics, healing from dysfunction, and building the life you deserve. Remember that you are not alone in these experiences, and there is hope for creating better relationships and stronger boundaries regardless of where you started.